Hello and welcome to the second lesson in the Python Crash course. Once again, this course is brought to you by Banana Chip Tech. My name is Sam and I will be guiding you through input and output today. So to start off, let's talk about input and output. For the sake of argument, we're going to consider the program as a black box, in which the inner workings of the program are unknown, and only the interaction between the outside world is visualized in this picture. Input refers to the information coming into the program, while output refers to the information coming out of the program.
Let's talk about the types of inputs in programming. The first type of input that we're going to be talking about the most is going to be input functions. And once again, this course, while we're learning mainly Python, I do want you to get into the habit of realizing that a lot of the stuff we're talking about here is generalizable to a lot of other programming languages. And so even though the input function, as you'll see in a little bit, is the exact way we do input in Python, there are other ways that we can do input in other programming languages that function the same way. So for instance, in C++, we can use the cin function. In Java, we can use scanner to read input into the program. So again, recognize that input functions, while we're going to be specifically learning the input function in Python, input itself is generalizable to most other programming languages. Now, the second way we can deal with input in programming is by using files. So we can store some information into a file and then read it from the program. And you might be wondering, why would I need this when I can just use the input function? And recognize that files allow us to run our code much more faster and much more efficiently because we have our information stored in a file. Sometimes it's a lot of information, it's like megabytes of information in our file that we want to read into a program and use. And it is much more easier to use a file than it is to use the input function. Now, these last few types of input, we're not going to be talking about too much today. We might be talking about it a little later down the road. But the first one is arguments. So what an argument is, we could pass an argument into a function in order for the function to have some input to deal with. Now, an extension of this is command line arguments, where we can pass in arguments when we're running our program from the command line. Again, don't worry too much about those. We'll be talking about those in more detail later. And finally, there are multiple other ways to add input into programming. So for instance, there's a way to hook up a microphone to your program so that you can record audio. But again, these are different things that we'll be talking about at some other time. Finally, the types of output in programming: print statement that allows us to print stuff back out to the screen. There are files where we can write our information out to a file. Return statements where we can return information from our functions, as well as, again, much more.
Let's go ahead and open up our PyCharm to start looking at an example program where we can work with input and output. A new PyCharm project called input and output, as you can see on the top here. And we've already created our main.py. Now notice that PyCharm gives us some sample code to start off with. In later tutorials, we'll talk about how to use this code and how to use it effectively. But for now, we're going to go ahead and delete this code. So you should have an empty screen like this with no code at all present. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to introduce a comment. And at this point, you're probably wondering, why are we introducing comments? I thought we were learning input and output. And we are, but I want to make sure that we're able to document the code that we're doing so that when we come back and look at it later, we are able to read our notes and see what was going on. So to write a comment, all we have to do in Python is put a hashtag. And a hashtag will tell the computer, hey computer, this line of code does not need to be executed or turned into computer code. This is simply just a note for us so that when we come back later and look at our code, we can follow what was going on in our code. So go ahead and put an hashtag and type out author and put your name here. So my name is Sam, and so I'm going to be putting my name here in the author block. Let's go ahead and give it a description as well. And let's tell it that this program demonstrates the use of input and output. Exclamation points. Now notice we can also add in a date created field. This is sometimes useful. Whoops, I spelled created wrong. And so we can go ahead and it's the 5th, May 20th, 2021 for me, but put whatever date it is for you. Now let's go ahead and now that we've created our comments, let's go ahead and demonstrate how to use input and output. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to type out print hello world. Now let's go ahead and run our program. And you notice that out here on the screen, we're able to see hello world. And so I want you to take a minute and guess what do you think what this is doing. Is this input or is this output? I hope that you guessed that this is output. And as you can see, I'm going to write a comment that will tell me that this is a demonstration of output. All right. And so as you can see, we've printed out to the screen here. We've told it that we want to print out to the screen, out to the user, hello world. Now this time you're probably wondering, well, that's great. Now what if I want to print something else to the screen? So let's go ahead and print out I like potatoes. So we go ahead and print it, I like potatoes. And I want you to look at this and think about what is the similarity between these two statements and what is different between these two statements. And by testing yourself like this, you'll hopefully get a better understanding of what it is that this program is actually doing. So I hope that you guessed when you were doing that exercise, you saw that these exclamation points here are the same, and the print statement, this print function, is the same as well. But the words that we put it with inside the exclamation points are different, and that is exactly correct. When we do a print statement and we want to tell the computer print out verbatim, word for word what we're saying, we put quotes around our text. You can use single quotes or you can use double quotes. Personally, I prefer using double quotes since if you want to put an apostrophe, Python doesn't get angry at you if you have it surrounded by double quotes. Whereas if you have it surrounded by single quotes, you notice that Python is like, what is going on? PyCharm gave us multiple ones, and it was too confusing. So I prefer to use double quotes. That way you're safe. So let's go ahead and try printing out something else to the screen. Let's say I like cheese. We go ahead and print I like cheese. We can see that we have printed out. I like cheese. At this point, you might be wondering, okay, so this is cool. I have this print statement I can print out to the screen. Is this the only way that I can do output? And the answer to that is a resounding no. We can also write out to files as output. Now, writing out to files is a little more complicated. So if you are this seems like it's going too fast, pause the video, watch it at half the speed or something, and go over it again. But bear with me as I go through this tutorial to show you how to write out to a file. So first, to write out to a file, the first thing we're going to do is create a way for us to access the file. So the first thing we are going to do is create a way to access the file. So to do that, we're going to say open. We're going to call it output.txt. All right. And so by doing this open function, we are opening up this output.txt file. We also got to tell it that we want to do write, because we want to write to it as output. And then we are going to do dot write. And so dot write, we can write out whatever we want. So you can say this is a cool testing file. So now if we go ahead and run it, notice that we've got a new file here called output.txt. And in this output file, we have written out some text. There are better ways to do this. So I'm going to give you a brief overview how to do it right now. But if this is seems a little too much, please tune in next time when we give a discussion about variables. So we can separate this into 2 or 3 lines where you can say f equals open output.txt, and then we can say f.write, and then finally we can say f.close. And so notice the only thing we've really done differently here is that we've separated these into multiple lines and created a variable f that does most of this stuff. We've also added in this new line f.close. And what f.close really does is it tells us Python close this file so that we no longer have to look at it. And the reason you need to do this is the idea of cleaning up after yourself. So once you open a file, you need to make sure that you close it so that the computer can then realize that you're no longer using that file anymore. There will be problems down the road if you decide to leave the file open for some reason. So always remember, if you're deciding to use this method, to close the file after you're done writing from it. So if we go ahead and run it, we'll notice that it still worked. And so that's the second way to do output. And again, if these file handle, this f equals is a little confusing to you, next time we will talk about this in more detail. So that's great. We've done output. So we've demonstrated how to use a print statement for output. And we've also demonstrated how to use files as output. All right. But now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do input. Input is a little more exciting because we can get some information from the user and put it into our program. So to start off with, we can start with input. Now notice this is like input. We can give it a prompt. So let's just say prompt. Enter your name. And we can go ahead and see how that works. So notice when we've run it, that this program hasn't told us that we've completed. You see up here, we haven't got our green arrow back. And so our program here is stalled and it's waiting for us to enter our name. So if I go ahead and enter my name, then we can see that the process finishes correctly. So this is our way that we can get input in from the user and use it in our program. And now you're probably wondering at this point, well, how do I use this? Great, like I have this input function, and I have some information here. Well, how do I actually use it? And so the answer to that question is we're going to be using a variable to store our information, which again we'll cover in more detail in the next lecture. But we will be able to, we can print that information straight back out to the user using the print statement. So if we go ahead and run this again, we notice it's stalled again, and I type in my name, then it prints my name back out to the screen. So it gives you an example of how to use input with the input function. With the input, whoops, sorry, I got caps locked. With the input function. Now the next thing we want to do is, use input from a file, right? That seems exciting. We wrote out to a file and we want to read in from a file. So to do that, we're going to be doing pretty much the same idea. We're going to be, again, first writing out a comment that we're going to read in input from a file. To do that, we're going to do f open, right? We're going to say open. Let's call this input.txt. And we're going to say we're going to read. So notice that there's a W here when we're writing out to the file, and there's an R here when we're reading from the file. And we will talk a little bit more about the syntax that we're using here to open the files in a future video. I know I'm saying we're going to do a lot of stuff in a future video, but for now, I just want you to kind of get an idea of how this works and get an intro to how this works. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say f.read. We'll just say f.read because we'll read the entire thing, and we'll go ahead and print that out to the screen so that we can actually see what the user wrote. Now, in order for this to work, we're going to have to create a new file. So, just follow along here where we click on that folder. We say new file. We'll call this input.txt. and we'll say this is a cool input file. We can see this text printed out to the screen. Wow, exciting. So if we go ahead and hit run, we enter our name. Now notice that we can see that we got that information from our input file. I realized that I forgot to close the file, so just to be concise and accurate, do remember that we do need to do this f.close. That's an introduction to input and output in Python. Next tutorial, we will discuss more about how these variable works, like in line 15 and line 26, as well as give you an introduction of the type of variables. Thank you.